Hey everyone, I'm the Tailorette. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and today I will be working on a basic 18th century dress. I have never done a video on how I make my polonaise from beginning to end, so I plan on using this basic blue cotton. Alright, so first of all, when I am cutting out my 18th century dresses, or any dress for that matter, I actually cut out all my larger pieces first. So I will cut out the skirt pieces first. So I will talk mainly about the polonaise, since I did not talk about that in my other video. This is the skirt that attaches to the bodice that goes over the petticoat. So I will fold this over. So basically I'm going to cut two pieces out of this skirt as well. So we basically want the polonaise to be the same length as the petticoat underneath. So basically my waist from the floor, my natural waist to the floor, is 41 inches. So we're going to have 41, plus we need to add 2 inches for the hem, so that's 43. Plus I'm going to add an extra 5 to go at the top of the skirt, and I will show you why. So take the length of your waist to floor, add 2 inches plus 5, which is 7. So you're going to add 7 inches to the length of your waist to floor. So that is 48 inches. So I'm going to cut 2 long pieces at 48 inches. So I literally just take my measuring tape and I measure 48 inches all the way down and mark them with pins to where I'm supposed to cut. And it's all cut. I didn't record that part. So basically I'm taking the other piece that I just cut and laying it on top and mimicking it so I can have a guide to cut. So next part, I will be cutting out the bodice. So there's a few things that I do differently, and I'm sure this is not period correct. However, I am all about having the right look on the outside if that means breaking some rules. So what I do with my bodices, especially if I'm using a linen or a cotton, I will cut the outer fabric and not just leave it at that. I will take either a broadcloth or a regular cotton that's just like this one, and I will cut the same pieces out and make them one piece and count that as one outer layer, but this will be on the inside, and then I have a lining. It does sound like a lot, however, it gives some body and some shape to the dress. It doesn't look like it's sagging, and there's less rippling around the body. So I'm going to only cut out the bodice part, not the sleeves or anything, just the body. Here is a perfect example of why I cut my bodice pieces last. See all these little, I don't know, little pockets of things? I was able to flip the bodice around so it would fit this way, whereas if this were a skirt and it was a straight line, I wouldn't be able to cut across there. So here's an example of why I cut my smaller pieces last. Okay, so I have all of my bodice pieces cut out. This is my lining, and then these are the pieces that I'm going to make one. So what I'm going to do, this is the side back piece. Here are my 2 outer pieces, and I'm going to take these guys and literally put them on top like this. These are my broadcloth pieces, and I'm going to put just a few pins in here. You can pin it more if you want. I'm used to putting less pins in just because I know how to handle fabric. I've been handling it for quite a while, so don't feel guilty if you need to do more pins. And so I will be stitching all around the edges with a basting stitch about 1/4 inch from the edge, and I'll do that with all of my bodice pieces. So I'll take my lining piece, set that aside, and do it with the rest of these pieces here. So I did actually cut my sleeves out of cotton, not the broadcloth, because I'm not going to do a lining for the sleeves, and I will show you that in a minute. So I'm actually going to use this. It's going to act as my broadcloth / lining. It's going to play both parts. Here we go. And now I will stitch them 1/4 inch all the way around the edges of all of these pieces. So when I start, back and forth, and then when I get to the end of this row right here, I literally keep the needle down and I pivot like that, and then keep sewing. And every time you get to a corner, you pivot like that. So now that all these pieces are sewn together, now I can actually put the pieces together as if it's one bodice outer piece. So it's one piece. So now you'll literally stitch all of these pieces together according to whatever directions you plan on using. So put the bodice together. Okay, so I'll be doing the lining as well, so I don't have to go back and do the same steps. So I'm putting the lining together, sewing those separate. So here are my center back pieces for the lining and the outer shell. And then building on the outside, putting the side back pieces on. So this is basically like chain sewing, but I'm clipping as I go. I'm not letting it go over the edge. I'm literally just pumping it through the machine. So once I'm done with this seam, I clip this guy off and start sewing that one on. Put the other side back seam on. Makes for putting the bodice together so much faster. And I don't press anything until I have to put it. I'll show you in a minute. So basically, I put all the side seams and back seams together, and I don't press them until I have to do the shoulder seams, because there's a seam at the shoulder seams and it has to be pressed open. So on the outer shell, I'll typically flip it over and press the outside just to make sure all the seams are nice and flat, because this is what is going to show on the outside. So along these seams is where I'm going to put my boning, so I'll show you how I do that in a minute after I press all of these seams open. Alright, so now I need to make the casing for my boning, and so I am basically going to sew on one side of each seam. So for the center back seam, I'm choosing one side, and I'm literally going to stitch just a tad larger than 1/4 inch, not 3/8, but somewhere between 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch. And then I'll do the same on these seams here. I'll probably do it on the inside seam here, and I'll do that on this seam as well. So, but this is only on the lining. Do not do this on your outer shell. Alright, so now I have my 1/4 inch boning, and I'm literally going to lay it down on the bodice right here and measure. And I'm going to have this going from 5/8 from the top, maybe a little bit more like 3/4. And then I'm going to do the same on the bottom as well to allow for seam allowance, because you don't want the boning to get caught in the seam allowance. So cut it with a pair of paper scissors. I have this up the center right here. It's kind of curled over. I have a tutorial on that. The link is in the description below on how I deal with my curled over boning. So I won't be going over that in this video. And do it to all of these back seams and side seams, all the casings. Okay, so now I have all my pieces flattened out. They're not as curled as they were before. So I am basically going to stick them inside these casings here that I sewed along each seam. Alright, so I have all those done. I do plan on putting boning in the front, but that will be on a next step. You can add more boning down here if you want. You can just take these casings that come with the boning, if you have casing with the boning, and sew them in there. However, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, you could do like a boning going right there, but I don't feel the need to do that. So, but if you want to, you can, but I'm not going to do it, and I never do it. So next step would be, now that I have my boning in, is I can actually sew these shoulder seams together like this on the outer shell and on the lining pieces. Alright, so we are ready to attach our lining to our shell piece. So I am literally, let me turn this around so you can see it better, literally going to sew the bottom first. So also around this part and up these sides right here. So I'll pin it. It's helpful to pin at the seams. I pin at the seams and then I pin in between to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. All right, so stitching down the center front here at 1/2 inch and all around the bottom. Now that's finished and it's time to flip it. So we'll flip it and like that, basically. And when I do my corners here, I basically fold this over like that and like that, and these corners, so that when it comes out, it's a clean cut corner. Grab it, pull it through, and it should hold. And then I take my pin and pull it through. And there's a nice clean, the corners are really distinct. And I do that with this part right here too. I will fold it and fold it again into a point. Grab this, pull it out. It's not as distinct in the back because it's a thicker point, so at least it's somewhat even looking. And I'll repeat that to the other side. Basically, I'm going to stay stitched to the lining. So I'm going to press this open with my fingers like this and stitch 1/8 of an inch from that edge right there. Just kind of open it up as you go. This keeps it from folding to the outside, the lining, because we don't want the lining to be folding out. And go down as far as you can. You can't always make it down to the very, very end. That's pretty typical for stay stitching. And I'll do that around all the way to the bottom of the bodice and on the other side of the front as well. All right, and off to the iron. Okay, so this next part is important. It is pressing these edges down. So because we stay stitched, now it's a lot easier to just push this down, and you'll see that there's a really nice clean divide between the lining and the shell. And we'll press that down. Should be nice and clean cut right there. And then we'll take this curve at the bottom of the bodice, and I'm basically doing the same thing at the bottom, making sure there's a nice clean divide between the lining and the shell of the dress. Pressing it down. Stay stitching is huge. It's a key technique to making things look right, especially around necklines. I always do stay stitching around my necklines. Even if I'm doing like a bias tape around the neckline, I will always do stay stitching on the bias tape before I hand stitch it down. So we did all that detail work on the bottom of the bodice and the sides, so then stick it on the mannequin to see how it looks generally. The next step would be to put the sleeves on. Actually, I need to add the boning in the front here. Okay, so I hemmed the sleeve, and as you can see, I actually serged the edge and then flipped it over once. So I don't want to have too much bulk in the sleeve at the bottom because I'm going to put a lot of trim down there, and it might kind of feel a little bit constraining on the elbows. So for the sleeves, I like to sew them in. However, some people like to baste the sleeve holes together, the lining and the outer shell. I just pin them, and then I'll pin the sleeve. That way it saves me time going back and forth from the machine. So after the sleeve is sewn in, I like to press the edges down. This gives it a nicer look. Next step is cut a strip at 2.5 inches and fold it in half with the iron, and then you're ready to put on the neckline. You can do this on your regular machine. I'm going to do it on the serger just because it's easier and it trims everything off. However, you could just sew this at 5/8 on your sewing machine, trim it off to 1/4 inch, but I am basically doing this on my serger because it trims it to 1/4 inch while it's sewing. So stick it under there, and this is where I don't pin. I literally just sew as I go. I line it up as I go. Now that that's finished, I take it over to the other machine and I stay stitch. I fold it over and stay stitch 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge. So that is officially on. And then this part, I don't pin it either. I just flip it over because we have that stay stitching that's keeping it in place. Because I have plastic boning, I can do a few stitches over the plastic boning. And basically making that clean fold right there. There's, as you can see, there's the white and the blue. The bodice part is officially done. We just have to attach the polonaise part of the dress. All right, I didn't record me doing all of these steps, but I did hem the bottom of the polonaise and I hemmed the front sides of the polonaise. And I'm about to go and serge the top of this to make sure that it doesn't fray. All right, so I serged the edges and I folded it over about 1 inch. So now the next step is I'm going to flip it, the outside facing up. And what's nice is the back seam is actually the center back. So I don't have to find the center back or pin the center back. And the whole idea is you're going to look at your bodice and see how many inches wide you need to make your polonaise. And we're gonna fold it to that size, or that, I like it to go around the base of the bodice, 20 inches total. So what I'm basically going to do is pleat this side down to 10 inches and this side down to 10 inches. Alright, so I measured the length of my polonaise and it is 44 inches long. My waist to floor is 41 inches and this is where my waist is. So I am going to have 3 inches poking up behind here. So when I lay this down here, first of all, I'm going to measure from the center back seam of the bodice over to the right 10 inches. Because that's how wide we made it. 10 inches from here to over there. Hey, okay. And then I'm basically going to find where is 3 inches down, just to have a marker. Put a pin here, and a pin over here. Like so. Lay this on top, match these with the edges. And here's my waist. I'm putting it where the pin is. Pin that down and then kind of let this curve. Okay, so now it's all pinned down. Basically, I'm seriously just going to hand stitch this to the polonaise all the way across. All stitched, and then after that I take out all the pins and the pleats and it's ready to go on the mannequin. So it's technically finished and I have a second video coming out on the trim. So that is the base of the dress. However, I will say this is not a great job. So if you're going to do something basic, as I've mentioned before, these lines and ripplings would not be here, but because I'm doing the trimmings, these are going to be covered underneath. So if you would like to see that second part, hit that subscribe button because you'll want to get the update on when the next video comes out, and also like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.